Hey everybody. So I should be live now, and what I'm here today to do is really just to discuss the actual live stream, discuss the actual Musket and Tomahawks release of version 2. And I'm just hearing myself talk actually in my own headphones here. Just got to shut that off. And so for many of you may have noticed, if you've been linked into Studio Tomahawk on their Facebook page, they actually put the announcement that they'd be actually doing the second edition, and they listed some information. They wrote up a bit of a on the philosophy for the most part of they're going to be the release without going into specific rules in depth. And I thought I'd do just a little bit of a reaction video today to that. But as part of it, I thought I'd just kind of read a little bit from that article just to be able to bring up some of the points that they brought up that they would be including or in what they thought about and actually doing this second edition. Now, looking here, it looks like it's listed as version 2. And basically what they're saying is that they describe the game, and they describe it as it currently is, and that it's a skirmish game set in North America in the 18th century. It's, for small forces, 20 to 40 figures, although it's possible to have larger battles. And so they describe the game this way. And so that may be an indication that it's going to be the same. A lot of commentary they put in here indicates it is the same game, but then there's also commentary that indicates there are going to be rule changes. They mention how miniatures are grouped in units, often 4 to 12 figures. The flow of the game is based on a deck of cards. Now they mention that being on based on a deck of cards, it brings an element of uncertainty, chaos, and tension to the game. That is something I've always enjoyed about Musket and Tomahawks, and so would be something I would welcome to remain in it. It mentions that that there's a loyal and devoted fan base even 10 years after the release, which is very cool. That Studio Tomahawk actually produces a lot of different games. I see Saga as one of the bigger games that it has a huge fan base and is a huge part of their offering as a company. But it's great to see them pay tribute and to the fact that this was one of their first games. It's a game that a lot of people, including myself, still love, and that there's that recognition in making this next edition. So they mentioned that the theme and the mechanics of the game is still something that is dear to their hearts. And so after publishing the second edition of Saga, the next big project they knew would be Musket and Tomahawks to take another look at it. And so they mentioned that it's going to arrive in first quarter 2020. So that's an information piece. So, we're going to see it in the first quarter of this year. Now, they mentioned that the goal with the second edition was to update the game, keeping its specificities and personality, which that's excellent. It sounds really good. And the purpose of the information that they've provided here on this Facebook kind of article is not to go into the rules in depth, but to explain the philosophy of the game. Now, it is mentioned that D10s will be used, replacing the D6s, and this allows for to refine possible results and modifiers, but the core mechanics are identical. And so they mentioned that close combat was something they took a look at to make it simplified and more intuitive. I know there were on the Studio Tomahawk forum people that felt that that was one area that deserved a bit of closer look at as far as when revamping the rules. For the most part, they said that the basic mechanics are going to remain the same in the game, that your miniatures are going to shoot the same way, and I'm quoting them, movement remains very similar, and the spotting mechanisms are here, and many elements have been added to give depth to the game, which is very interesting that they're adding more elements. But I'm really quite happy to hear that in particular, the spotting mechanisms are there, because that is something that I've done videos on and I've talked about it, something that I find a little more unique in the games I play to Musket and Tomahawks, that your miniatures, even though there might be line of sight, there's various attributes that determine whether the miniature can actually see that other miniature on the board. And so one piece here they mention is that units will be able to adopt a dispersed formation. That's going to be interesting because, typically in Musket and Tomahawks, you do have skirmishing type units, but you have basically the firing line. And it sounds to me like there may be possibilities where some units that had to adopt a particular formation in the first edition may be able to adopt more than one kind in this one. In the first edition, you could actually come out of a firing line too, but it sounds like they have some very specific rules around a dispersed formation that might be different than the first edition. Another piece they mention is that officers will be able to engage in duels of honor in the midst of the battle. And so that will be interesting. There were abilities to have miniatures fight against each other in first edition, but it wasn't structured, I think, as a duel of honor. And so it sounds like more rules to help facilitate that, which sounds great. So they mentioned that another element of the game is the cards that they paid attention to. And without going in detail, I'm quoting them, they say that they've evolved this aspect of the game the most, which is intriguing to me. They wanted to make the game more tactical, involving the players more in the card game. So each side will now have a hand of cards, where before, as many of you may know, we had essentially the deck that you would constantly just turn over. It would randomly determine who's going, what sort of things may happen, like other than units, like you may have the event card or something like that come up. And so they're basically changing that a bit. But if you remember earlier, they still talked about how it's based on a deck of cards, and they still kind of talked about how there is a chaos and randomness that kind of is added by that element to the game. So I'm reading this as there's going to be a bit of both. And from what I see here, that we're going to have still some randomness, because they talk about that with the deck of cards and how that's a big aspect of the game. But now they're saying that there's a hand of cards. So perhaps there's going to be some randomness, but also a little bit more strategy, where you're taking perhaps cards randomly out and having a hand, then you get to choose from the hand. So perhaps it's a bit of both. That would be very interesting. I'm actually kind of not disappointed. I'm actually kind of interested in how that's going to look. They mentioned that there's a command point mechanism that's added that you can use to trigger command abilities. This allows the player to exert some control over the chaotic aspect of the skirmishes. And the system of command abilities was unanimously approved by our testers. So it's something that they've tested and they've added, and it was something that people liked. So that's very interesting. They wanted the rule book to be comprehensive as possible. You'll find rules for dealing with a wide variety of situations, particular weather conditions, settlements, boats, main weapons of the 18th, 19th century, as well as no less than 50 personal plots, which is amazing. That's great. To customize your officers. In short, 80 pages full of information. So this is interesting. And in the next section here, they do talk about how you're going to basically have your lists based on a period, similar to Saga. What I am interested in is Saga actually had a sort of fairly smaller rule book on the front end with some basic mechanics and ways to play the game and principles that would then carry into all of the other Saga universes. This one, I'm not sure, but it sounds like the initial rule book, that the rules that may govern more than one period, first one being Redcoats and Tomahawks, it sounds like that it may be a little bigger than the Saga rulebook. Like it could be that that's the 80-page book, or it's possible that the 80 pages they're referring to is the supplement book. I'm not sure based on reading it. But in either case, I'm expecting that may be a little bigger than the Saga one as far as the basic mechanics of the game. One of the things that I've always loved about Musket and Tomahawks is actually the it looks like I've got a couple of folks in here joining me. Hey, Chris at Walkabout Games, as well as Stig of the Dumb. Hey guys, thanks for joining in the live stream. This was unplanned, so it's kind of cool people jumping in. So the other piece I just wanted to mention is that one of the things I loved about Musket and Tomahawks, the main game, is that, or the original first edition, is the scenario generator. Now, it's always great to be able to set up specific scenarios with your friends or do something a bit more generic, but we almost always love the scenario generator in Muskets and Tomahawks. It's not something that I've seen done in the same way in many other games. And this is mentioning all these things right here, like weather conditions and all of these other variables. So, and I think that's great. And the mention of boats and a lot of these kind of things you would see in the French Indian warfare, and having it mentioned here is just very reassuring, just to have that game still that we love. And so that's really awesome. And so the Muskets and Tomahawks books, it says that one of the major changes is that it's designed as an expandable range that will allow us to explore multiple periods. So this, I have to admit, was a surprise to me. I did not see this coming. I didn't have, I actually thought that this was going to be perhaps more like a Congo release. I've said that several times on the channel, only because I really liked, even though I don't have Congo, I don't play that particular game. I thought they did a really good job with it from what I've seen, and it was a bit more standalone. I do know that they did have, I believe, some expansion later on to it, but it seemed more standalone on the initial release. I thought that's what we'd be seeing. But in a lot of ways, even though I didn't see this, I like Saga, and I like how they've done this with Saga. My biggest worry, as somebody that loved the first game, was that we were going to get something that covered many periods in the original rulebook and standalone, and that the French Indian War element, or the North American element, was going to be a little bit lost compared to the first edition. Because I felt that one of the real strengths of the first edition was just such a great text on French Indian War gaming. Like, there was such cool elements to it, whether it be the Studio Tomahawk way of having characters walk you through the book that are like Vikings and Saga, or in the case of Muskets and Tomahawks, you had characters within the French Indian War period, or whether it be just like the extensive rules on like swivel guns and boats and canoes and like all this kind of stuff, like black powder related stuff for the French Indian War. That in a lot of other rule sets. I really felt it was the strength of this game. So now the fact that they're dedicating a universe book to North American warfare during this period, and it mentions French Indian War, American Revolution, and then War of 1812, leads me to think that you're still going to have that. Like, you're still going to have basically that all that info that that makes it such a great game, for French Indian War gaming, or these other periods will be in there. And it won't be that, let's say, Napoleonics, which is a huge period that many people love, and it's very encompassing, of a period. It's hard to just mix it into something without really diluting the whole thing. Well, now you'll actually have a book. They mentioned Shakos and Bayonets, which will focus on the Napoleonics and be another universe that you can use these rules for. And so I actually think, even though I didn't see it coming at all, and I don't know why, but I just think it's a great idea. And so I'm really quite happy about that. And so Redcoats and Tomahawks will be, it says, deals with French Indian War, American War of Independence, War of 1812. Mentions that you'll have your lists of units within that book, specific rules to that period, an asymmetrical scenario generator, which I think is great, as well as a table of events adapted to the period. So many of these things, if you really like the original game, would not sound totally unfamiliar. It would be the game that we have always liked. This book will be first in a series of supplements. Each supplement will come with its own deck of cards. So the supplement is where you get the cards. And so they would then match, I'm guessing, the types of units. And so Napoleonic War would have its own deck of cards, which then would have potentially units that you didn't have available to you, perhaps, in, let's say, American War of Independence. It's like mixing. And so that kind of makes sense that you have different deck of cards that way. You can, and then you'll be able to buy them from your local shop or download from our website, which is also very cool. So they're already working on Shakos and Bayonets, and that's something that we're going to be seeing in a later quarter in 2020. Also, you'll be able, if you want to get on this sooner, you can actually get it through a Kickstarter at North Star Military Figures. And so that's very good. Like, that's a place to go to. And then they mention that that's where you can pre-order the game, but then later it will also be available at your favorite retailer, is what it's saying. So it's going to be available in more than one spot, but if you want to get in on it early, it's going to be at North Star Military Figures with a Kickstarter. So quite excited about this. My reaction is positive to this. I really like everything. I'm kind of interested in everything that I've heard. I like the idea of trying out the D10s for the mechanics. I like the fact that they're doing the multiple universes, and so like I can have a book on North American warfare within this period, which is, and so that's really exciting. I like the fact that they're keeping like really integral things like the scenario generator in particular. And so, yeah, it seems all very exciting. One part that's a bit intriguing, because I don't really know how it's going to work, is how you now get dealt a hand of cards that you'll play. I'm expecting that possibly there's still some randomness to this, and which ones you get out of the deck to supply to your hand. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't know what you guys think. I'm excited to hear your opinions. Thanks for Chris at Walkabout Games and Stick of the Dump stopping by and saying hello. And please feel free to put comments below and take a look at the info for yourself if you haven't already on Facebook, and just share your thoughts about what you're thinking about the game. Take care, everybody.